Guten Abend, Astenator. Prost. Salute. Yep. Attila, hello, hello. Hi. Cool. 2 is enough for me. Get started. Right. So, jump back into Pitchfork today following last week's session. And what I wanted to do this week, or today, is to bypass some of what I've been working on previously, which was looking at, as you can see here, archetypes, careers, skills, all that sort of thing, which is what I've been focusing on for the last 2 design diaries. I'll come back to that, put a lot of finishing touches on it. I've got a couple of things I'm thinking about, which I'll probably talk about shortly before I crack on with today's topic. But at the end of my last session, or last episode, if you want to call it, my last diary entry, I asked people on stream what they wanted to, if they wanted to see anything specific, and there was some overwhelming responses that people wanted to see adventures. They wanted to know about what kind of adventures would be run using Pitchfork for the playtest and potentially for when it goes out of playtest and into final. I've got a lot of thoughts on this, and it's a good thing for me to talk around because there's a lot of really cool things that have been going on in role-playing games in the last 10 years or so that have to do with the approach I would like to take here. And that's not a very traditional approach. I'm not going to come up with a modular, or not modular, I shouldn't say modular. I'm not going to be coming up with some sort of classic module for this game. I'm not going to be coming up with a 20-page adventure like you would normally see in most role-playing games. I'm going to be going with something a little bit more freeform, something a little bit more narrative, a little bit more improv. And I'm not going to recreate the wheel here. I'm just going to use a lot of existing books as inspiration. Borrow from here, borrow from there, and come up with something which I think will be a very cool way of starting a Pitchfork game. Now, there are some caveats with this. The approach I'm coming up with ideally should be run as a single session on its own before you actually play the game. Anybody who's familiar with this little game here called The Quiet Year, which is awesome, by the way, this is a card-based map-making game. It's kind of role-playing game-ish. The creator of this has gone on to create other role-playing games, and I'm just trying to remember her surname. It's Avery. I'm gonna have to look this up, so give me a second. The Quiet Year. Avery Alder. There we go. And hey Heegs, hi. And this little game is a single session card game, but you create a map in it, a combined map. And as you're creating the map, you're also progressing a year where things happen and, yeah, your community either thrives or usually it has lots of challenges, and eventually, at the end of the game, the Frost Shepherds come and the game ends. Now, this is a post-apocalyptic setting, but you could easily skin this and do a fantasy game. Lots of people do this. A lot of people are using this game to create communities or regions to actually start a role-playing game, and I think that's a brilliant way to use it. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about games like this, about games like this excellent game, Ironsworn, and similar other games. I've got a couple of Powered by the Apocalypse games here to talk around. Forbidden Lands is another example I'm going to dip into, things like that. I actually won't be kind of flipping through the physical copies I've got here. I do have everything on PDF, so if I actually flash up my my reader here, you can actually see the games I've thought about what I want to use, and I'm flashing up here. So we've got The Quiet Year, Ironsworn, Free from the Yoke, which is based on this game. It's an expansion of Legacy, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. We've got Kingdom, which is a spin-off from Microscope. and Forbidden Lands specifically, I'm going to be looking at the legend generator from Forbidden Lands. And then finally, the Perilous Wilds, which is an excellent wilderness sandbox toolkit for Dungeon World. But there's a lot of stuff you can glean from this as well. So those are the things I'm going to be looking at and talking about as I go through step by step. And I've put a little bit of thought into this and how I want to do it. So this is probably a little bit more, not necessarily scripted, but I definitely have a plan of attack. I'm not going to be kind of just coming up with things on the fly here. So that said, I want to do a little bit of a quick dive back and show some of the things I've been thinking about with the other things I've been doing in my diaries, because this is always as you do game design, you have to constantly revisit things you've come up with before. As you're putting new features in place, you have to make sure that everything is balanced well together, especially if you're coming up with something more or less from scratch. So, or you're doing something you're flexing an existing engine quite far from how it was designed to be used, which is what I'm doing here with the Year Zero engine. So just to go back, I'm actually one of the things I'm going to change here is with the character creation steps. But we'll talk about that later. So I'm actually going to probably put another chapter in here, which is going to be called, for now, I'm going to come up with a better name for it, but Your Settlement is fine enough. We'll put a TBC in there. But this is effectively what we're going to be doing today, this Your Settlement bit. And attached to that, right at the bottom here, I have Adventure Seeds. And Adventure Seeds is effectively what I want to get to at the end of this. And it'll all make sense when I come to the end of it, hopefully. But a big part of Adventure Seeds, or coming up with adventure ideas, is having them grounded in the community that the game is going to take place in. And part of that community is going to be the player characters. So this is a game about commoners, and therefore the commoners need to be a central element. Their lives need to be a central element to this game. They're not going to be adventurers. They're not going to be starting out delving into a dungeon. They're not going to be going out and exploring the wilds or anything like that. So for those sorts of games, you can kind of do what you want a little bit more. There's not such a big focus on world building or community building, faction building, that sort of thing. And in Pitchfork, that needs to be something that is front and center. But I also really want it to be something that is unique to every table. And therefore, I'm going back and, that way these adventure seeds need to be a little bit tailored to the setting. So that's why this is kind of a two-pronged attack here. For me to talk about adventure seeds, I really need to talk about what I wanted to do with community building. So that said, let's go back, and I'll mention the things I'm currently thinking about here with this. So I'd originally come up with these archetypes and careers, and I think last time I'd actually put 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 next to all of these. One thing I thought of afterwards and I put in here is that you come up with you choose a rural archetype or an urban archetype based on your group concept, which is the previous step here. And once you know whether you have a rural or urban group of characters, you then roll on the relevant table. And I did this here with the 2d6 to kind of weight the results a bit. So I've put percentages in here as well, so you can kind of see, like, if you were in a rural playing as a rural group, the results are weighted based on how common these different groups of people are. I wanted to change the name of this as well. How common these groups are, making up a percentage of the rural population. So Bogfolk, I just wanted to change briefly and call this gatherers, because it still works for everything listed here. Charcoal burners gather wood to make charcoal. Herbalists gather herbs, and leech collectors gather leeches. So we got like hunters and gatherers, basically, like that. But yeah, as you can see here, near over 50% of the results you'd be rolling for a rural archetype are going to be peasants, because peasants made up the vast majority of the rural landscape in the medieval times and the kind of low fantasy feel we're going for here. Tradesfolk are the next. Anyway, so as you can see here from the numbers and stuff, I'll just zoom in slightly, so it's I'm not 100% sure this is how legible this is on to everyone watching, so we'll just zoom in a bit. too much. There we go. So that was my thinking. You roll an archetype, and then there are some examples given within the archetypes, and each of these examples would have a list of skills that apply to them, but they would just be for guidance. You could absolutely pick one of them. However, the idea would be you come up with your own. So if you rolled hunters, for example, you wouldn't be stuck with just these 3. I would stat these 3 up in the book, and again, the only thing that these would really have would be like a set of skills, maybe 3 or 4 skills that apply to them. So it'd be really easy for you to come up with your own brand of hunter, whatever it happens to be, and you just pick 3 of the skills that are kind of like career skills for that career, and hey presto, you've got your career for the game. That's the kind of the way I've been leaning towards it. However, I've also since been thinking that it could be a good idea to just come up with a list of 36, because that's how many results you get from a D66 table, a list of 36 rural careers and a list of 36 urban careers. And basically just have them as, if you look at any other game like Warhammer or Aquilare or games like this, they have a list of careers, and within that list of careers there's very specific options for that career. So you're not creating your own, you're picking, you've got one, and then you basically use that as the character starting point. So I'm kind of in two minds about how I want to do this. However, I think thinking about how I've been thinking about doing the collaborative world building initially, I think having a little bit of narrative freedom, or a bit of, not narrative freedom, but a bit of freedom on the player's part to come up with any archetype they want is something I think would kind of work better. So I'm probably going to stick with this approach I've got listed here. The other cool thing with this is that, or the other feature of this, I should say, is that I want this game to be compatible with existing games that it's inspired by. So if you wanted to run a game of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, or a game of Aquilare, or a game of Harnmaster, you could create any of the careers within those games by sticking them into the relevant archetype here. Assuming you're not rolling a martial career. You're not trying to create a martial career. But even then, you could absolutely do that. It's just I'm focusing on commoners in this game. So if you had a commoner in Aquilare or a commoner in Warhammer, you could slot them in the relevant spot. This brings up a few issues to do with the urban archetypes, which I've changed from last time. I had, I think, clothiers and what did I call them? Culinarians, I think I called them. So I had like different types of gilded or artisan types of careers. One of them focused on cloth or like the cloth trade, and one of them focusing on food preparation, food making, like a butcher, a baker, and a brewer were the 3 culinarian ones. Having thought about that a little bit more, I've changed this up a bit, and I've basically ditched. I've combined and renamed them a little bit, and I've renamed them as Gilded Commoners, which basically means somebody who's within a guild, but they're not in what you would consider like an artisanal, in the modern interpretation of the word artisanal, in like an artisanal occupation. So the artisanal occupations, the way I'm looking at this, are the things where the people are creating goods for the more wealthy classes within a kind of like medieval society. So you've got your armorer, you've got your stonemasons. Stonemasons create, they do carvings. They're the ones who create cathedrals and things like that. So they're not just like whacking together, stones, making stone fences in a field. They're actually highly trained and skilled. So they're creating, they're like master builders basically. Tailors are, they would make more fancy clothes, generally speaking, than for the common people. Most common people would that wouldn't be able to afford tailored clothes. They would make their own clothes. They would buy cloth that usually wouldn't be dyed. They probably wouldn't be able to afford that, and they would basically do a lot of their own clothing making themselves. So those 3 are examples of the sort of more high-end, middle class, if you will, careers. But the problem I have with that is it feels less like a commoner, even though they were commoners, than a lot of the other ones on this list. Gilded commoners, on the flip side, are people who provide services within a guild, but for everyone. And that would be a butcher. A butcher would provide meat for everyone. A fuller. Fullers are people who prepare wool for clothing. So absolutely anybody would use that. A tailor would buy wool from a fuller. And fullers are basically, if you don't know what that means, are traditionally, I think in England anyway, would traditionally be women who would beat wool that had been treated with something to prepare it. So fullers had a very physical occupation, beating sodden wool like all day long, basically, and also stewing it in vats and kind of stomping on it, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got tanners. Tanners prepare leather, and a tanner is a horrible occupation, one of the worst occupations in the world ever. But leather is needed by a lot of people, by everyone really, and therefore it's kind of what I would consider like a common career, though it's still gilded. Anyway, so that's kind of the way I've been thinking about it. I'm not 100% sure which way I'm going to go with it, although I think for now I want to draw a line in the sand and stick with what I've got here. There might be some tweaking. I might strip out artisans, for example, because it feels a little bit too high-end for me, and I might actually stick in something like a criminal archetype in there. And under criminals, it would be things like a charlatan or a pickpocket, something like that. So that way I could introduce some of the criminal careers that aren't necessarily martial. But yeah, that's where I'm at with that. Skills, the next thing to think about with skills, I've added some stuff in here with age, etc. Yeah, I'm all over the place with skills. I currently have a list of 20, which I'm pretty sure I had this. I'm pretty sure I had 20 last time. This is what I had last time. No, 18. So I've actually scrubbed this list a little bit from what I presented last time. So I should now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 20 skills separated between general and advanced. And the idea here would be everyone has at least 1 point in the general skills, and the default is you have 0 points in an advanced skill. So the only way you get advanced, that you can use an advanced skill, is if you've had some training in it. And that would happen at character creation. You could decide if you wanted to, or if it's relevant to your career, or you decided you'd have some extra skill points to spend, you could put some points into an advanced skill. But yeah, I kind of separated out a little bit. I had here, for example, last time, things like trade specify. So trade wouldn't actually be a skill. You would have trade smithing, trade woodwork, something like that, right? And therefore there'd be almost an open-ended number of trade skills. Operate vehicle in the same way, you would specify which vehicle you can operate. So you'd have a skill operate cart, operate boat, operate ferry, as I've got listed here actually underneath it. So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to introduce focuses back in, and focuses are skill specializations, if you've ever come across that in another game. And this, I've got examples. I've got 3 examples for every single skill I've got listed here, other than sorcery. I've added sorcery in, so sorcery is one of the new skills I've added in. And other than that, I'm just trying to remember the other one I added in, because I think it's more or less the same. Yeah, I had skullduggery down, right? Skullduggery was a combination of sneaking around, hiding, picking locks, performing sleight of hand tricks. Alchemy, if you wanted to have it, would probably be... I would probably put that under crafting as a crafting focus. It was basically any specialized trade knowledge would fall under crafting. So if you can see, I've got brewing there. In fact, I could even change brewing to alchemy. That would make it even more clear. Yeah. So I've split out skullduggery into sleight of hand and stealth, because having thought about it a little bit, it made more sense to me that sleight of hand could be for things like juggling. It could be for things like palming an object, and you can be very good at that without being necessarily very, very good at sneaking around. Because you'd have people like hunters. This is where it started breaking down. I was thinking about some of the careers and how I'd assign skills to them, and thinking about some of the rural careers where you wouldn't really have, pickpockets and stuff in a small village, they would need a like a stealth skill, a lot of them, for working in like being hunters, where they're sneaking up on birds or whatever, right? So stealth made a lot of sense splitting that one out, because this isn't focused. If I was doing a game that was focused on urban settings, then it might make sense to combine the two. But in this case, I've gone with splitting them out. So those are the two little changes I made to the list of skills. And having those focuses there, I've given 3 for each skill. And the idea is that the player can come up with any focus that they want. But the 3 are there to provide a bit of an idea of what's meant by them. So that's the latest. That's what I'm going with at the moment. I've since thought about potentially removing focuses and coming up with a bigger list of skills. So not having 20 skills, having something more like 30 to possibly 40. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to stick with what I've got here, at least for the first playtest. I want to kind of stick with this. And I think 20 skills is manageable. It's easy to get your head around. I will probably be moving them around a little bit so that it's easy to understand what they mean. So, for example, I might say core skills. And the core skills would be things like acrobatics, which is a measure of your agility. In fact, I might even be renaming some of these. I might actually rename acrobatics to agility, because that's... Still, your agility is your ability to balance, to dodge, and to leap, that sort of thing, right? How agile you are. Or I could call it dodge. In fact, I'm just going to leave it for now. But my thinking was I could put some of these together as like core skills, like have them separated from the rest of the list of skills, and it would be things like acrobatics, might. These would all be general skills, by the way. So you'd have acrobatics. I'm just going to color these in as well. So we'll do it like this. We'll color them in orange. Yeah, that works. Acrobatics, might, sway, and awareness. And if you've played any of the Year Zero games, you might see what I'm doing here. I'm kind of tying them to strength, which is might, agility, which is kind of like acrobatics, but agility is also things like your dexterity, like how good you are with your hands. Wits arguably is a mix of all sorts of things, but awareness to me is a really good indicator of wits. And sway being like manipulation, that is like a measure of your empathy in a Year Zero game. So by pulling those ones out and saying these are sort of like the 4 core skills that define a character and have them listed separately, then it's kind of like making it easy to get at a glimpse of your character sheet, the kind of core aspects of your character. How aware am I of my surroundings? How fast am I? How strong am I? How manipulative am I? That sort of thing. And the rest is all kind of... I mean, I could even put stealth in there. I could even say, like, how sneaky am I, as an example. So that was my thinking. Having some of these what I would consider like core skills kept separate, and then I would list the rest out in separate sections. And yeah, I then thought about how I would do character creation. I'm not going to talk about this, but I've thought about how many you would start off with, how you would assign them, etc. And I don't want to show that off too much right now, because I think that would be quite... It would take a long time to talk about it, and that's not what I'm here for. Yeah, magic sorcery. I did add it back in, and... yeah, I'm kind of torn about it, but because I've added it back in, I might be adding an archetype here to do with because some settings it's an important part of the setting, right? I don't want to preempt the setting and pigeonhole people by saying you can't use magic at all with Pitchfork because I don't have any rules for it. I think I have an idea for how I would do magic anyway, and I think I want to include it in the kind of core game. Saying that, at the moment I can't think of any archetypes which would include magic. Perhaps Herbalist might have some sorcery. I could add in something like for Travelers here. I could get rid of. So a Carter is. I mean that's kind of boring, right? So I could put in here a Hedgewise. Hedgewise being like a hedge wizard or a witch, that sort of thing. So somebody within a rural, like within a village, who does like magic, very very like minor, like a witch, like an urban, like a rural, like a village witch who kind of everyone goes to, but might or might not be sanctioned by the authorities. And I don't think I'd put one in urban archetypes. Maybe there would be something similar. You might have, I don't know, it might even be called like a herbalist, or I don't know. Now you might have like a apothecary, and the apothecary is dabbling in sorcery, something like that. Yeah, village elder type, maybe. I mean, it really depends on your setting, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about soon. So I've put it in for now. I might be stripping sorcery out and replacing with something else. If I do, then there'll be another advanced skill in here, because I want to kind of try to keep the balance between the same number of general and advanced skills, although that's not really so important. So, for example, advanced skills, it kind of makes sense that you can put as many in there as you want, and because you kind of would just add them to your character sheet when they apply. So it would also, I could have theoretically 20 advanced skills if I wanted to, or 12 or 5. It wouldn't really make any difference. The main thing is that the general skills that everyone can do cover general abilities, and I think I've got a good handle on that here. So let's move on. Let's talk about what I wanted to talk about today, and that is, I'm going to go back up here to your settlement. And your settlement, so this comes before character creation. If you look over on the left here, this is the outline of the entire document. We've got the introduction. I want to have a rules overview in this. So this might actually branch out. It might even be, there's an introduction with a very small rules overview. And then I might actually put the rules, some of the rules chapter, like right at the beginning there. So this might not even say rules. It might just be like an introduction to the game itself, one page, one side of not even like a spread if you're looking at a book, like 2 pages, but just a single page of an introduction. And then I might have a chapter on the rules, and have that, because this isn't going to be a very rules heavy game. And I wouldn't have, this would be the core of the rules. It wouldn't be, so basically the stuff I've currently got under skills. When you look at skills, you've got things like how does rolling the dice work? How does pushing your roll work? How does meta currency work? How do things like helping on rolls, parallel actions, etc.? How does all that stuff work? That could all go right at the beginning, and I could do that fairly condensedly over 2 to 4 pages, even if I'm for the playtest anyway. If I want to be kind of sparse with my words, and then I would have a separate chapter on conflict and trauma and that sort of thing, and that would come after you've created a character. So the idea would be, you know how the rules work first. You then create your settlement, your community. In fact, I might even call it your community, because that makes it sound a little bit better. You create your community. You then create your character. And because you know roughly how the game works and what the various elements of your character sheet mean, like skills, like exactly what a skill means, that sort of thing, you can make those informed decisions in character creation without needing to skip ahead later in the book to see what they mean. And I think that's really important, is having the context before you get there. But I don't want to have the entire mechanics front loaded. I just want the base, like the core front loaded. So your community. This is where what I wanted to look at today. So I've thought about this quite a bit, and what I want to come up with is a kind of community creation mini game, almost, I want to call it. So if you say this will be a mini game of sorts, ideally lasting an entire session, and then in brackets, in combination with character creation. And I put here, downside is that not ideal for one-shots. But the GM can easily do this on their own. All right. So let me talk about what I want to do here. So the overview here of what I want to do is this. I want to have it in a stepped, and this could change as I start working on it. So the steps I want to go through look like this. First, you're going to create the settlement. And that's also going to include including geography. And we're going to be looking at the quiet year for this, and Iron Sworn. Second step we're going to be looking at is the ruler. Create the ruler. So we're starting at like if you think of it like lenses or a camera, we're starting out with quite a wide view of the region. Not even region. We're not even going that far out. You could do this. You could do world building on a different scale, and you could start with the country, and do some defining, very loose defining of the country. Then zoom in a scale. Look at the region that you're basing this in, with like all the villages and cities in the region, and then zoom it onto where I'm looking at now, which is the settlement. But I want to start with the settlement because I think that's the most. If you're a commoner, you don't travel much, and your entire world revolves around your little area of the world. You might know about the rest of it, but you can develop that during play. I don't think that's necessary for what I'm going for here. What I want to go for here is a very, very focused feel of commoners within their community and the struggles they go through in a fantasy tabletop role-playing game. In fact, I've just thought of an idea for another threat or adventure hook, which will come right at the end. And I'll just tell you now, it's like an adventuring party passes through, right? So we could look at the impact that a typical adventuring party has on a group of commoners, on a typical impoverished or not non-wealthy community. So that could be things like suddenly the blacksmith finds him or herself flush with looted weapons and armor, and as the community is trying to decide, do they smelt these down? Are they going to wait for the peddler who comes once a month to come by and see if the peddler will buy any of it? Do they want to see if the noble is interested, but the noble might just seize it all if it finds out about it? There's all sorts of adventure hooks you can come up with this sort of thing. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent already. So creating the ruler, and this is going to be things like the noble house, the manor, etc. Right? And we're going to be looking at what was it called again? Free from the Yoke, which is based on Legacy. It's a spin-off, like a fantasy spin-off of the Legacy Powered by the Apocalypse game. After we've got the ruler, we're going to be looking at locations within the settlement. And for this, I'm going to be looking at well, Kingdom has a little bit on it. There's not a lot of information here, so I'll just come up with this on my own, more or less. But we'll look at Kingdom to see how Kingdom does it, because Kingdom is a very interesting book about this as well. Then we're gonna create characters within this settlement. So create characters, and these really are the NPCs. You could theoretically possibly PCs too. Yeah, the idea is that you're creating the movers and shakers, or the whatever you want to come up with. You're creating the people that populate this settlement, and the idea would be you're not necessarily creating these people to be the player characters. You're creating them to create what feels like a living, breathing settlement together. And for this, we're also going to look at Kingdom, because Kingdom has some really interesting way of looking at this. And then we're going to look at rumors and legends, which I think is a cool one. Create rumors and legends. And for this, we're going to look at Forbidden Lands and the Perilous Wilds, which both talk about this a little bit. And finally, we're going to create threats. And for threats, this is mentioned in Kingdom a little bit. Yeah, so that's the overview. Makes sense? Anybody have any questions about that before I move on in the chat? Is everyone still there? And of course there's lag. Lag probably before you hear me, and then lag before I see your answer. I have no idea how many people are watching at the moment. I should probably open that in another window. Twitch. Cool. Got at least one. Heegs is watching still. All right, cool. I've got three people watching, it looks like. So that's fine. Okay. All right. So, let's look at step 1. Step 1, settlement. And I'm gonna when I come to each of these steps, I'm actually gonna flash up some of the PDFs I want to be using here. So this is taking inspiration from The Quiet Year and Ironsworn. Okay, 30-second delay. Ah, it's quite high. Interesting. That's a lot longer than it should be. That is very interesting. I probably can't change my settings live. But I'll just have a quick look at what I've got set here. Stream delay. I don't have the, yeah, anyway, interesting. Okay. So we're taking inspiration from The Quiet Year and Ironsworn. So let me show what those books do, or how they what I'm talking about, what I'm getting inspiration from. So we'll start with the Quiet Year, which is a game I really like. I've played it with my home group a number of times, and the idea in this is that you're creating a map together. It's got a deck of cards that come with it, although you can use a normal set of deck of cards as well. But yeah, the first thing that you do together is you have a blank piece of paper and you go around, and every person that's playing, there's no GM, every person who's playing kind of starts putting features onto this map. So here we have it here. This is the section that talks about it, sketching terrain. And it says before the game begins, and the idea here is this is a post-apocalyptic community. They are in a settlement which is more or less fairly new. So it hasn't been established long, and that's kind of what you need to know about it. So before it begins, you need to establish some facts about the community and what its surroundings are like. And the surroundings are the important thing I want to focus on here. So you begin with a brief discussion, taking 2 minutes at most, of the general terrain and habitat of the area. This can be as simple as someone saying, "How about a community in a rocky desert?" and everyone else nodding in agreement. At this point, each of us should introduce one detail about the local terrain. When we introduce our detail, we then sketch our contribution onto the map. These sketches should be rough and simple, leaving lots of blank space for additions during play. The community itself should be fairly large on the map, perhaps occupying a third of the sheet. Unless otherwise stated, assume that our community has 60-80 members. Now, that bit there doesn't really matter. The other thing to think about here with this application to Pitchfork is that Pitchfork, I'm creating Pitchfork to be both a rural and an urban commoner game. Now, it may be that I split that out. It may be that I start with Pitchfork being a rural, like a village, like a peasant simulator, if you will, and that I develop something else later, like a spin-off or an expansion, which is the same set of rules, but here are some things like community, this community creation I'm talking about now. Here it is tailored to urban environments. Here are careers tailored to urban environments, etc. So that's something to consider. I might want to try and keep it laser focused on rural villages to start off with. But for now, I'm trying to keep it, I'm seeing if I can do it with the two together. Anyway, so here we have, that's basically how you do this in The Quiet Year. There's an example given here, which is a group might decide to set their game in a forest. The first player introduces the detail. All right, the forest is full of young, spindly trees. The next player adds, and it's nestled within a steep mountain range. Remember, each time they're adding these things, they're sketching them onto the map. The third player adds, we've taken up residence in an old mining camp. And the final player says, and the trees in this area, one area of the map, have all been clear cut. As the details are added, the players draw them on the map. it's pretty straightforward. We'll come to resources in a second because that's also a part of this. But that's effectively what I'm going to be doing here. So the other thing to look at is Ironsworn. And this is, again, a game I really like a lot. And Ironsworn does collaborative world building. And it's awesome. It has this area called the Ironlands, as you can see here, with 9 regions defined here. The Barrier Islands, the Ragged Coast, the Deep Wilds, etc. And the idea is that you pick one of them to base your game in. You're not playing across the whole thing necessarily, but you're kind of fleshing out the region that you want to play in. And each of those areas has a single page. I'm actually going to change this to fit the full page on. But you probably can't see a lot of the detail here. But basically, you have the name of the region, you have the features in a bullet, in bullet form for what are the features of that region, and then you have a little description, 2 paragraphs describing the area, and then you have here an adventure hook. And this is the brilliant thing about it, Ironsworn, is that for almost everything in this book, there is an adventure hook. So by the time you finish reading the book, and tailoring your game before you start the game to what you want to play, you have generated dozens of plot hooks. And it's great because then you can just jump straight in. You've got okay, I actually really want to focus on this adventure for today's session, and away you're going. It's amazing for improv. And the last thing for each of these regions is that there is a picture, a photograph, but like a doctored photograph, for each of them. So the Barrier Islands, you can see from this, it's very descriptive what it is. The Ragged Coast, again, you can see, narrow fjords built on rocky shores, etc. The Deep Wilds, the Flooded Lands, and you can see for all of these, they have the features, 2 or 3 paragraphs, and a plot hook. The Havens, the Hinterlands, Tempest Hills, Veiled Mountains, and the Shattered Wastes. And the cool thing about this is that you have this little region. Now, this is looking at, this is zooming out further than I want to zoom out. This is zooming out at the kind of like the country level, if you will, or the continent level maybe. And then these are looking at the regions, and you're not even looking at settlements. So this is starting a lot further back than I want to. However, I really like the idea of this, that you have these features about what makes up the region. And this is something I want to tap into a little bit. We'll come to your truths. We're probably not going to touch on your truths. That's a really cool element of Ironsworn. This isn't an Ironsworn review. This is something different. So here's how I want to do. Here's how I want to do it here in Pitchfork. So yeah, the first thing you do is you get a piece of paper. So here are the steps. Get a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper for your map. Agree as a group. The size and the size of your settlement and the surrounding geography. And for this is the other thing I think I want to do here is roll d6 for each. Or roll d6 for each. So if you can't think of something, just roll the dice or look at the table and come up with something. And the size of your settlement will be something like a hamlet, a village, a small town, a large town, a city, that sort of thing, right? So, you're looking at these different sizes. Now, this is where it gets difficult because if the agreement is on, I might not even be able to do d6, right? For the settlement, because the settlement needs to be decided. That's where you're deciding whether it's rural or urban. So if your settlement is something like, if you want to play in a rural game, it's probably going to be a village, but it could be a small town, but it's probably not going to be bigger than that. So there aren't a lot of options, and I don't really want people at this stage to be defining the number of the population of their settlement. This is more like a very rough idea of how big it is. So Yeah. I may not do D6 for that, but the surrounding geography, certainly you can do that. And the D6 would be something like, again, I'm not trying to cover every use case, but again, thinking about the games that I'm interested in emulating here, they're games that are based on the European medieval, European Middle Ages. So I'd probably be looking at European geography as a whole. So I probably wouldn't be putting things in there like deserts and I don't know, frozen wastelands and things like that. I'd be basing it on areas that had communities during the communities and feudal kingdoms during the medieval times, during the Middle Ages. So yeah, so I'm going with geography like surrounding geography. It'd be things like, in fact, I'll just put it in here. We're looking at forests. I could say like large forest. We look at its coastal. Yeah, Attila. Community building in session 0 before character creation. Exactly right. Large forest, coastal. It could be plains. Could be mountainous, etc. Okay. Then the next big thing to do is to look at resources. So we're going to put here resources. And again, I'm going to actually pull up the quiet year here. We've got here starting resources, and this is something I'm borrowing straight from here. Yeah, it kind of would be like creating the arc in Mutant Year Zero. Yeah. Mutant Year Zero, the arc is fairly well defined. You just kind of pick. There's like a very small number of options you pick for it. Whereas this is really defining it however you want, and defining it. If you wanted to play, for example, let's say you wanted to play Pitchfork in the old world with Warhammer's old world. You could pick any village on the map and have a name for it. You have got a name for it then, but you don't necessarily know any details about it. And this is where you could basically define everything you want to know about that village. It's still set in the old world. It still has all of the lore and all of the all the elements of the old world could be included within this world this game world that you're playing in. But you're focusing really on one small community, one small village. Where it would kind of break down is if you're trying to use this to define. You could still do it though. It's still like try to define a larger town or like a city. So something like Altdorf or Ubersreich, Middenheim, somewhere like that. Now these are all fairly well defined in Warhammer lore, but there's no reason you couldn't do a lot of the stuff I'm looking at here. You would just basically tick some of the boxes when you're doing it, right? So you'd be saying, for example here, agree the size of your settlement and the surrounding geography. So if we're looking at Marienburg is surrounded by marshes. In fact, I could put marsh in here because that's kind of a cool one. Yeah, it's surrounded by marshes, and it's coastal. So you could say coastal marshes is it. So this step here, agree a size of your settlement, the surrounding geography would be, it's a city, a large city surrounded by, a large coastal city surrounded by marshland. That's it. Resources would be the next one. So resources, this is what I was pulling this one up for. It says, next we each declare an important resource. Remember, this is post-apocalyptic, the quiet year. We declare an important resource for the community, something which we might have in either abundance or scarcity. So, what are these important resources? Some examples. Again, post-apocalyptic. They might have, it could be clean drinking water, energy, protection from predators, adequate shelter, or food, right? And then you basically, and it says, choosing a resource makes it important if it wasn't already. If you pick gasoline, it becomes something that your community wants and needs. As a group, we now choose one of those resources to be in abundance. It gets listed on the index card, so there's like a separate index card, under abundances. And whoever called it now draws an abundance of this resource on the map. The other resources get listed as scarcities. Yeah, they each declare an important resource. This is how this works here. So every player says this is one of the important resources in our game. Then basically whoever called it adds it. Oh, so everyone mentions it first, and then you as a group decide on whether it's something that's in an abundance or something that's a scarcity. And whoever came up with that resource draws it on the map then, wherever they want, to indicate where, where it is or where it used to be. And it says, remember that symbols and symbolic representations are fine, but words should be avoided. Anyway, so that's the idea behind it. I really like that. It works really well when we've played The Quiet Year. And this is, I think, really important for building a community which feels alive. And it's a step that shouldn't be avoided. And that is, villages exist for a reason. And communities exist for a reason. You can't just have a community out in the middle of the forest with nothing, providing nothing, right? It's there for a reason. There's somebody looking over, there's like a noble or a ruler over that area, and they're interested in that area. They're taxing that area or that community because they're taxing it, right? So that community is going to have to create something that this ruler is going to want or need in order to, not get in trouble. Anyway, it's kind of how feudal societies work, right? If it's a village that is agricultural, then they're producing crops, and a proportion of those crops will be going to their liege lord. If it is a community based around a mine, for example, they're going to be mining ore, and a certain amount of that ore is going to be, in fact, maybe all of that ore is owned by the liege lord. So that's the idea. So the idea here is that resources are identified. So the group agree. Group agrees which resources are... This is where I want to change it a bit. Which resource is abundant? I might be changing these words later, so I'm not just copying the terms from The Quiet Year. And which is scarce. Or roll a d6 for each. And again, as an example, we might have something like wood, crops, herd animals. Again, this is very rural focused. Fish, could be a fishing village. It could be, as I said, raw ore. Or it could be a village along a major road, so it would be shelter. So you could have a village that is sprung up around a roadside tavern, for example, and everything in this village is focused on providing support to that inn or that tavern or whatever. I don't know. That's just off the top of my head, right? So that would be rural. These would be, for example, rural examples. If it's an urban example, the resources might be certain trade goods. So it might be well known for, like a lot of cities were well known for specific things, right? So they're well known for beer, or I'm just trying to think. Certain places were renowned for their weapons. During the Middle Ages, there were certain areas that created swords. That if you had a sword from this area, then it would be, the best sword you could possibly get your hand on. Something like that. So it could be a trade good or whatever, right? But if we're focusing on rural examples here, this is a good one here. This is a kind of a fairly basic list, but kind of ticks a lot of boxes. So let's say, for example, you decide that you want to be on a coast. You want your settlement to be on a coast. Fish is likely to be something that is abundant, right? So you have fish in abundance, and that's what you're producing. That's what you're trading. That's what that's what the settlement is focused on. That's the idea here, is that whatever you've got in abundance is what the focus of your settlement is based on, right? If you are a coastal village, but your resource is raw ore, then obviously you're a mining village. There might be fish nearby and people are fishing for sustenance, etc. But really ore would be the thing that's in abundance that the focus of the settlement is on. And indeed, why your ruler, why your liege lord is cares about your village at all, like why they would come and protect you if somebody was attacking or interested in your livelihood. That's if they had any reason to be interested in your livelihood, that would be why. You're not just a name on a map that they could care less about. Although that could be the case too. And the flip side of this is also picking one which is scarce. So what's scarce? You could be a fishing village, and wood could be scarce. We use the Marienburg example from before. Well, let's say it's not Marienburg; it's a village along the coast from Marienburg. It's in marshland, and there are shrubs and things like that, a few trees, but wood is in very short supply. So you automatically create this interesting dynamic within your community just by identifying two. And ideally, I mean, you could create more than two. Create more than one of each, if desired, but no more than create two of each, if desired, but no more. Yeah, I think otherwise it becomes, you don't want to create, this game isn't focused on being an economic trade simulator. It's focused on the characters, the individual characters, and the ordeals that they're going to be going through, right? It's meant to be dark and a bit horrific at times, and this is really just to give flavor to the settlement, to help the group get an idea for what the settlement's all about and what its purpose is. So that's more than enough. And then after we've done that, we're gonna kind of look at the what's happened in the quiet year here. And we're gonna go back to doing this bit here, which is introducing details. So after this has happened, we do each player and the GM. The GM can be involved in this, absolutely. Take turns so that each player and the GM each define one landscape detail. Define and draw. And for here, I would provide a D66 table because this would be fairly easy to do. And let me show some examples of what I mean here. So this would be things like cups of trees, nearby lake, stuff like we're specifically talking about one geographical detail. So this is natural geography, not social geography or whatever it's called. So we're not interested in things like walls or man-made things. We're interested in nature. So it could be a copse of trees, it could be a nearby lake, it could be a swamp, it could be a huge ancient tree, etc. And a D66 table is 36 results. There'd be a lot of that going on. And that's it. We have created the settlement. Step 2. And this is basically broad strokes, right? Step 2 is the ruler, I believe. Create the ruler. And here I'm a little bit out of my element. I think the ruler is an important element here because this could feature as a background, an important background detail with personality and motivations and all the rest of it. So I'm probably going to leave this a little bit scarce to start off with because I haven't looked at enough. There are quite a few books I have which address this sort of thing, and I haven't really looked at them in a lot of detail. So it's something I actually want to devote a little bit of time to. So the idea here is that the group would agree. What did I put up here? So I'm going to look at here inspiration from Free from the Yoke. Here are the steps. All right. Might only have one step. The group agree. I'll have 2 steps, I guess. Manor location. This is important because probably not in the middle of the settlement. Often a manor is located a little bit far away, but overlooking, so it's kind of like looming, but not directly in the center of like a nearby village. But the idea here is that there's going to be whoever's in charge, and this could change a lot. In fact, I'm going to change it from manor to group agree. That's probably one step too far. So first the group needs to agree the ruler's role. So this could be a nobleman or noble family. It could be a If it's not a noble family, who's in charge of a village? Could be a bailiff, I guess. Yeah, I guess a bailiff would be in charge if... yeah, warrior's a good idea, too. It could be a warrior. Bailiff, etc. That's good enough. Yeah, so you're basically identifying who's in charge. Don't need to name them or anything like that at this stage. You're just basically agreeing on what, like, who it is that's in charge of that. Then you agree on the ruler's... Group agree, location, group agrees. That's why it's highlighting it, I guess. Group agrees, location of ruler's home. I have no idea what it has a problem with here. Oh God. I'm using shorthand. Leave me alone. So I'm going to raise this probably not in the middle of the settlement, because if it's a bailiff, they're going to be right in the middle of everything, right? They're going to be in charge, but they're also going to be living right alongside everyone. It could also, if it's not the bailiff, it could be like it could be a merchant, something like that, right? There just could be. It could be depending on your setting. The setting might not have nobility. And maybe there's like a wealthy merchant who runs the town, and they're in charge. It could be some sort of like democracy or something. Yeah, Astonata is saying he meant more of a knight. Yeah, I agree. But if you're doing like a Viking, you could use this game for a Viking age game, and then it would be like a housecarl, something like that. And I don't want to use the term knight because knight isn't very old world. I'm trying to think of this in terms of yeah, like Warhammer. Because for me, this started off, this whole idea of this game started off as a Warhammer fantasy roleplay hack. But it has lots of other applications too. So I'm happy with keeping it as a warrior. I could even call it like warrior caste, right? So we know it's somebody from a higher caste. It's someone above the commoners. Then they agree the location of the ruler's home. Not necessarily in the midst of the settlement. Whoa! Right to the end. That was a miss. Click. Okay, and then this is what I'm going to look at. Free from the yoke. So free from the yoke, if I just quickly show it off, is a game of... so it's based on this game Legacy. Legacy is focused on building generational... like building a community in a post-apocalyptic future. And often I think a lot of them are on like other planets and stuff. But the idea is you have these like houses that are all competing with each other, etc. So it's quite an interesting role-playing game in that it's got this much greater, wider view of the world than you would tend to see. You're not necessarily controlling individual characters; you're controlling houses. And this is kind of the same, right? So you've got these great houses, and the reason I'm looking at this is more of a fantasy take on it. They're saying here, it's kind of Slavic, I think. Yeah, they're talking about here about the Golden Horde, Russia. They're talking about Slavic inspiration. The Witcher is mentioned here, etc. Right? I've not actually read this book. I've just skimmed this. it's on my I have so many books, but anyway, I digress. The point is, I know that it's got this section on how to build a great house, and that's what I want to be looking at now. So here's the anatomy of a house. Or let's take it a step back, actually. And I don't want to go to this level of detail, right? Because the idea for this game is that you're creating noble houses that are every player is in control of a different house, and they are competing against each other. We don't want to do that at all. We want to create a single ruler for this area and think about the bits for that ruler that are important to get an idea for who that is. So we're just going to look through this a little bit. Anatomy of a house. Your core statistics are your reach, so how much influence you have. We don't need that. The grasp, about its ability to project force and maintain control of its assets. That's kind of an interesting idea. So we can maybe think about the level of control that they have. So ideas here. Level of control. And what I don't want to do is not hereditary, not the heraldry. What a coat of arms referred to as? That is heraldry, isn't it? Not small. Not is it macro or micro? I can't remember. Micro, not micro details like heraldry. So we want to know about the level of control this ruler has. We want to know about the how are we going to phrase this? How the ruler feels about the common folk under their control. So their mood towards the settlement. Mood towards the people. Not mood. What's the word? Their demeanor, how they feel about them, like how well. We'll leave mood for now. Okay. What else? What else can we come up with here? Slight. Hide its actions and misdirect others. Not a thing here at all. Mood is your overall health and well-being. So we kind of already used mood to mean something else. Favor. So that's an interesting one. So you could theoretically have favor. How much power? Change it to power. No, favor. No, power. How much they have in the wider region. So is this some sort of minor noble? Is this a powerful noble? That sort of thing is kind of important. Disposition. Yeah, that's the one. Control. What level of control this ruler has. This is important because if you're playing with a bailiff, the bailiff might not have much control. They might just they're reporting themselves as somebody else. But that's even not necessarily that needed, because to the common folk, their ruler is their ruler. The person in charge is the person in charge, and they won't they have to do what they say. So the level of control is maybe a little bit outside the bounds of what we want to create here. We definitely need a name. And for this, we're going to be going with Warhammer inspired houses. Noble houses. I'll do that another time, not today. And just a couple more, maybe. Let's just keep looking at what Free from the Oak has. We talked about influence. Moves, your special abilities. We don't do those. Assets are the equipment your character has access to. That's interesting. And this one has 4 categories: armory, outfit, companions, and transport. But that's probably a good last one to do here, which is wealth. Right? Is this someone who has a lot of... I mean, it kind of goes along with power. If I could put it next to power. Not only how much power they have, but how much wealth they are. How much... How wealthy or impoverished are they? Well, make sure that they are questions here. How do they feel towards their subjects? Name, not a question. Yeah, what's the name of the ruler? So these so here's some ideas. Each one would be defined by one player or GM. Four there. Could either be defined by the group or each by one player. I don't want to put that in all caps. It's just for myself, really. But that's it. I think that's it for ruler. I'm kind of happy with that. Again, the idea is we want to have an idea of who this ruler is, how they feel about their subjects, what their place is in the wider world beyond the boundaries of the settlement, and yeah. I kind of feel like there should be more in there, so I'll have to think of that. I'll have to think about what else I can put in here, which is a bit more something else relating to the commoner, the subjects. Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to that. Again, I want to do some reading up on this and get some ideas from other places. The next one is locations. So inspiration from Kingdom. Here are the steps. All right. About 45 minutes to go still. I think we're gonna be okay. I think I'm gonna be able to do all this in the next 45 minutes. So this bit here is very, very similar to what I've got up here for the settlement. We talk about take turns doing this. I'm gonna copy that and I'm gonna paste that in here. Take turns. So that each player and the GM, so each player and the GM define and draw one location within the settlement. We'll roll a d66, so let me do those again. Could be tavern. Oh. Define and draw. Yeah. Could be a tavern. It could be the could be that the village or the settlement has a wall. Town walls. Could be that Yeah, I mean, it could just basically be, sites where the artisans that work within a village have their residence. So it could be like the blacksmith, the smithy. It could be the mill. It could be the marketplace, or market square, something like that. Yeah, that sort of thing. And again, this is a bit easier when you're thinking of a rural and an urban location. You just create whatever kind of feels right. The D66, again, I'd be looking at. I don't even know if I'm going to do D66. I might just provide a D6 for a lot of these things, where it's basically like, here are 6 examples of what I mean, right? So the idea is you come up with your own things and not necessarily roll on a random table. However, I think the random tables are kind of interesting, because it does mean that theoretically, if a GM wanted to run Pitchfork, but this is the thing, right? You could use the tables. A GM could use the tables, come up with the community on their own, but the players haven't bought into that. They haven't been a part of that process. They won't feel like they own that. They won't feel like when they actually create the characters or they're given pre-gens, they're not going to feel like they know their place within that community in the same way that they will if they've gone through this step. So I'm kind of creating a game here that isn't that well suited to one shots. It's more suited towards 2 shots, which is interesting. But again, I guess you could run this in the old world in Warhammer, and you could completely ignore this entire step, building your community, and you could just pick characters. You could go straight to character creation or have pre-gens and just use a Warhammer adventure straight out of published adventure straight out of a book. And this game should be able to support that as well. But for the types of stories I want this game to create and to talk about, I think it's really important that this focuses on the type of gameplay I want it to have. And again, remember, this is my first pass at doing this. I might try and smooth this out, scrub it down, simplify everything to a much like lower level, so you're not coming up with so much detail, right? This could be in an appendix for like a really if you have the time to do detailed community building. This is the breakdown. Here's a whole list of things you can do to create that in a greater level of detail. And instead, at the book, the default is spend 10 minutes at the start of your game to just outline, to talk for everyone to kind of agree what the community looks like. And you could just do some very rough ideas, rough sketches on a piece of paper, and leave it at that. And this is going down to a much lower level of granularity. This is really a mini game in its own. So again, I'm not saying this is the default way of doing it, but I might come up with a way of saying, here's a quick way to generate your settlement. Everyone agrees on it. Everyone comes up with the thing themselves. They all feel like they've bought into it and they've created a part of it. And there you have your settlement. So yeah, caveats here. So locations, that's basically it. I mean, I wanted to show what they do in Kingdom. Kingdom is a really cool game. I'm on page 10 here, so let me just go to the front here. Kingdom is a game about building communities, right? Ben Robbins created a game called Microscope, which is really famous. Yeah, and this is the whole game. This whole game is about creating a community. Basically, what I'm doing now. And then spending a session of playing out that community over time, like how when they come to what are called crossroads and things, there's some sort of element in their history that comes together, and how do they respond to that? And everybody controls a different element of that community as they're playing. So like the roles within the community. So you're actually kind of controlling characters, but it's much more. You're not at that level where you're necessarily doing it in character, like getting into the shoes of that character. It's a little bit more strategic. It's a very interesting game. Anyway, so let me go back to page 10 here, because page 10 talks about locations. And here's an example. So in this game, you say, what is your kingdom? Give it a name and a concept. So you can see here they're saying Cactus Flats is a frontier town in the Wild West. There are ranchers, rustlers, and gunslingers. The sheriff wears a badge, but law mostly comes from the barrel of a gun. Great. How did they come to that? Like, how did you come up with that that idea as a group? It's quite detailed. But yeah, a frontier town in the Wild West. Then you're creating threats, so identifying threats, and then the locations is the interesting one here, and this is what I wanted to focus on. And the locations, as it says here, is each player describes 2 places in the kingdom where characters are likely to be found and interact. This will give you places to roleplay later on and help everyone visualize the kingdom. Players can go in any order. Each player should come up with 1 location. Once everyone has made 1, each player goes again and makes a second. Give the locations names that people in the kingdom would use so you can refer to them when you roleplay. And here you have 8 examples, 2 from each player. A tap room. The tap room of the old saloon. Boot Hill, the graveyard. And I see Attila's mentioned a graveyard, so I'm going to add that in because it's a good idea. Oh, not Attila, graveyard, sorry. Giving it a name as they do so. Helga's Tavern. I don't like the town walls. So, 1 location with a settlement where characters are likely to interact. Once everyone has created... I like that everyone's creating 2. Once everyone has created a location, go back round and create. Go back. Everyone takes turns again to create a second location. Second named location. Here are some examples. Anyway, so let's just look at this again as an example here. The sheriff's office. I mean, these aren't named, but like the hanging tree's named. The Boot Hill's named for graveyard. It's kind of interesting. The sheriff's office and jail cell. Yeah. Hanging tree. So where they hang people, I guess, on the dry banks of the Cahuga River. Treacher's Canyon, surrounding the road north to Fort Brooke. Honest Cartwright's Dry Goods. And an abandoned mission on the edge of town. Its adobe walls crumbling. So I really like that. I think it's a really cool idea. Again, I'm kind of copying this idea in for now, but I might scrub this down so that it's a little bit more streamlined. So it might only be everyone creates 1. But I like the idea of 2 is kind of interesting because if you only have 3 people, if you're having like 2 players and a GM, they're going to come up with 6. If you've got, and the more players there are, the bigger the sandbox they're going to be playing in, and I kind of like that idea. And you could even say here, if desired, come up with, each player can come up with 3 or more locations. No. So this is the thing, is like, it depends on the amount of time you have, right? There's nothing stopping you. I don't even need to put that in because there's nothing stopping a group saying, hey, we've come up with 2 each, but I have another cool idea. And they'd be like, oh yeah, just let's throw it on. So yeah. France's mill, Sven's smithy, the market square, and the graveyard with a name. Cool. And that's kind of it. That's all I wanted to really look at with locations. The idea here is that you're just coming up with locations. You're coming up with names for them. Again, I can D66 tables. There's some really cool... In fact, I've actually got it open here. There's some really cool tables in... I don't actually. In Forbidden Lands. Let me just open Forbidden Lands then for a second. Look, I've got it here. Game Master's Guide. Adventure Sites. Village. There's some really cool adventure creations, like adventure site creation things here, which are really cool. I mean, I could even do some of this to start off with, but I like the collaborative approach that that games like The Quiet Year and Kingdom have, in that everyone's putting their own stamp on things rather than create... Because Forbidden Lands is about coming up with villages that are unknown to the idea is it's an adventure site, right? So this is a place that the adventuring party come across that they've never seen before. So they want to... the GM wants to kind of create a living, breathing village that the player characters can interact with, that they're new to. So the purpose for this is very different to what I'm trying to do here, but it does have some really cool tables that I could absolutely use as inspiration for creating my own thing. Things like the problem of the village. This is a really cool one, and this is something I might be coming back to for the threat, the last step I'm coming up to. In fact, it even says here the ruler of the village. Look, we got a D66 table for this. The oddity and the type. This is a really cool idea, and it's something I could absolutely do as well, which is you could come up with a greedy sorcerer. I mean, this is where it starts breaking down. But idea, like the point is, because this is very setting specific, and I'm doing a setting agnostic game. But there's some kind of cool, interesting things here. In fact, this oddity, this personality trait, could absolutely be something we put in with the ruler. In fact, so put that above disposition. The personality. Roll D66, or choose how the ruler... Choose the ruler's personality. Oh, German keyboard's a quirk. We'll call it the quirk. Right. So let me just look at that again and see if there's anything I want to add from Forbidden Lands to the location area. Claim to fame is interesting because this is the thing I've talked about before, which is the kind of like the resource, but this is something a little bit different, right? And that could add a lot of, like, the problem of the village I'm going to come back to. The claim to fame is something that's really interesting. Village oddity. Those same things are like, what's the village known for? That's something I could actually squeeze in somewhere at the beginning, maybe the first step. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. So after you do the resources, group agrees on what the settlement is known for. Forbidden Lands village. Is it called Oddities? Is that what it said? Yeah. Game Master's Guide. What page was it on? 170. Okay, and you know, this is something I could actually have. Could have a settlement sheet. With a big space in the middle for a big blank space in the middle for the map and all the detail to be added around it. That could be really cool. Could I make it? Yeah, I could kind of follow the theme I've got for the kind of medieval manuscript art for the cover, and have that apply. If people haven't seen the art here, I'm just going to show it off again because it's pretty awesome and I love it. By Harry Bottas, who is one of the players in our Forbidden Lands game on this channel. A4, Attila. There it is. So yeah, I really like it a lot. And I've actually got I've got another version of it, an updated version of this, which the colors are a little tiny bit punchier, but not too much. But it still effectively looks the same. It's got the same title, the same image. Just a bit sharper and a bit more punchy with the colors. But yeah, something like that where you've got, it's kind of maybe, I can kind of visualize it in my head. What I'm thinking of is like a sheet of paper, parchment sort of style. You can, at the top, there's a big space to put the name of the settlement, and then you put the details around it. If it's not already, like, you'd be putting details onto the maps, like the named locations on the map, the section we're just looking at, you would actually write those on. So you would draw a tavern, however you would draw that, and put like Helga's underneath it or something. The smithy, you could draw an anvil and put Sven's smithy, something like that. So you could kind of write details onto the map, or you could key it. So you could put an anvil, put it like a 3 next to it, and then on the side you've got like the keyed locations with like just blanks. So you can have like up to, I don't know, 20 locations, and the players they kind of draw it on the map, and they write the keyed location over on the side, like the named location. That could be an interesting way of doing it. So anyway, one way to think about it. Yeah, Attila, like A3 would work. Like if the default is A4, then anybody could print it out at home. Not everyone's got access to an A3 printer. I want to try and keep this as accessible as possible. But obviously, if you printed it out at A3, then you would have more space to draw on it. So if you have access to that, then you could absolutely still do it. And I'd probably make the file. I would probably try and make a lot of the elements of the sheet vector-based graphics, so that the file would be small, but you could blow it up to A2, A1, even A0 if you wanted to, and it wouldn't look like pixelated, badly made. Yeah. Anyway, that's going down a rabbit hole I don't really want to go down at the moment with final product. I'm not nowhere near that yet. So that's all I wanted for locations. Locations is pretty straightforward. And that's what I wanted to do. So name stuff. So step 4 is the next one. What have we got here? Step 4, create characters. Inspiration. Again, we're looking at Kingdom. Kingdom's got some really cool stuff here. Here are the steps. And again, I'm not exact. This is something I need to have a real think about. Like, how much detail do we want to come up with? Do I want to come up with for characters? Again, these are intended to be the NPCs that make up the settlement, the people that the characters are going to be friends with, family members potentially, etc., not the players themselves. So it's good to put a little bit of detail on them, but not necessarily a huge amount, because we want to keep this moving relatively fast. And in Kingdom, there's actually a whole section devoted to making your characters. You can see on the left here in the bookmarks, they have this chapter called Starting a New Game. You make the kingdom, which is where you come up with this bit here, the threats and the locations and the name of it. Then there's a whole bit about characters, and the characters are made up of these 6 elements here. I'm going to copy these out to use as inspiration, then I can actually play around with them a little bit more. So yeah, Shift Control, was it Shift Control V? Yep. So okay. Players take it in turn to each create one character within the settlement. Let's see how they do it in Kingdom. I'm kind of curious about the nitty-gritty, how it goes across. Complete each step together, don't skip ahead. Each player creates a character they will use to explore the fate of the kingdom. Follow these steps to make your character. Complete each step together. So, okay, so that's interesting. For each character, I actually like that a lot. The group discusses and agrees each step, but ultimately it is the player, ultimately it is the player who is creating that character. Oh my god, this is very wordy. Who gets final say. But ultimately, the player who is creating that character gets the final say. It's a little bit better, but it's still terrible. So, here are the steps. Do each in turn and don't skip ahead. Roll. What is the character's role in the community? Concept. Now this is where they can probably combine a little bit, because Kingdom has 3 defined roles. You have a power role, a perspective role, and a touchstone role. If I skip down a bit, here's what one of these sheets look like. They have like a character sheet for the characters. So here's the character's name. Here's the 3 roles. They're either in charge, they're a perspective role, which is you understand the area and you can foresee consequences, or a touchstone. You reflect the people of the settlement. They feel the way you do, and I think we don't need that here at all. I think the concept, so who you are, what do you do in the kingdom? What's your job? What are your duties? What do you look like? Man or woman, young or old? Your character must be part of the kingdom, and all the characters must be able to interact with each other, even if they come from different circumstances. So what is the character? So we're actually going to replace role with concept. We're going to get rid of we're just going to get rid of role completely, because it's not really applicable here. Concept. What? Who is this character? Who is the character within the community? Locations. Where can this character typically be found? Use the locations from step 3. Wish or fear. Okay, let's have a look at what this says about wish or fear. Yeah, each player picks 2 places where their character will be found from the list of locations, but we don't need to make it that defined. Wish or fear. State either a wish or fear your character has about the future of their settlement. A wish is something you hope the settlement will do or become. A fear is something you dread. Okay. What does the character fear, wish for, or fear for the settlement? That's cool. I like that. So it could be the miller is afraid that maybe the river has been the river that powers the mill has years where it's the river isn't as full, like there's drought or something, and there's not much water in the river, and the mill doesn't turn as well, or there's periods where it doesn't turn at all, and he's worried that, or she, the miller, whoever that is worried that the river will dry up. So that's gonna instantly, you can see like there's something tying that character to their community. That's also gonna play towards a motivation for them, like how they're, you're just kind of creating these characters that have 3 dimensions without just saying what's their motivation. And I kind of like that. But again, I might combine these a bit. Might just call it motivation or something like that, with some guidance. I might even do like D66 tables for it, whatever. Anyway, let's go to the next one. Issue. What's your problem? Personal issue that's holding the character back. Personality flaw or a difficult personal relationship. Okay, that's cool. I like that. We're going to call that problem. What is worrying the character? No, issue is better for now. Holding your character back. What issue is holding the character back? I like that. And bond is going to be a relationship, I guess, which is always good. Describe your connection to the character to your left. It can be a personal relationship or the way your duties in the kingdom require you to interact. Okay. The player to your right will also create a bond with you, so you will have connections to 2 characters. So let's look at 2 bonds. So they're saying left and left. Create a bond with a character to your left. Write down the bond created by the player to your right. That's kind of interesting. So bond, Marsden. So this is the sheriff, right? The sheriff has a bond with Marsden, whoever that is. Sheriff needs a wealthy cattle baron to keep his ranch hands in line. Okay, so that's the Marsden is the cattle baron. And then the other one, the other person is defined. Doc Wallace, a friend. Sheriff knows about the Doc's outlaw past. That's really cool. I really like that. It connects it connects all the characters within the settlement together as well. So create a relationship with the character to your left. And there's no need to write the second one, because if you're always creating one from the... I guess you would, because that's a relationship between the 2 of you. But this is an extra step. Once all the characters are created, you kind of need to have the characters defined before you can do the relationships. Although I guess you could theoretically do this from the second one onwards and not have to do this. Again, I'll think about how this works. But I really like that. I think that's cool. That's a good way of putting the personal touch on the community, making it feel like a living, breathing location. And then the last thing, I think... Oh, no, rumors and legends. Oh, yeah. And I don't want... So this is something that could get a little bit out of control. So the idea here is that inspiration from Forbidden Lands and Perilous Wilds. Here are the steps. Each player and the GM take turns to identify to create a rumor or legend about the settlement itself or something in the vicinity. Once all are finished, the group collectively agrees on which two to apply. These. Once all are finished, the group collectively agrees on which two to use for the settlement. So I don't want to create too many rumors and legends. I think two each, or two is enough. The idea is this gives it a little bit of flavor. That gives it a little bit of mystery. I mean, you could even just take this off. This could just be optional, right? And just say everyone comes up with one and those all apply. So, you know, we're not saying, note, there is nothing suggesting that these are true. They are rumors after all. And the reason I wanted to look at some of these other games are look at Forbidden Lands for inspiration on creating legends. Forbidden Lands has this really cool mini game, Legend Generator. And it basically goes like this. A long time ago, roll a dice. Before the Blood Mist, there was roll d66 twice, a treacherous warrior who sought a map because of a bet and traveled to a village located a few days off. Oh yeah, it keeps going. In a forest, in the direction of south, as the legend goes, it is said that he or she died in battle, and that at the location there is a suit of armor. Now, this is very, very Forbidden Lands. Forbidden Lands is all about exploring, going to different places, exploring ruins, almost like dungeon delving in a way, but putting yourself in harm's way. Now, that does not at all work for Pitchfork, but the concept is great. So I could very much come up with a legend or like a rumor generator that comes up with something similar. So people roll a bunch of random dice, or they can just go through and pick things that they like the sounds of, and hey presto, you've got a legend. And they kind of would all follow a similar pattern. But I also kind of like the approach that the Perilous Wilds takes, and it's a bit more freeform. So it's got the Perilous Wilds is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, in fact, for Dungeon World. And the idea is behind this is that it's all about exploring the wilderness. This is all like Dungeon World is all about dungeon delving, and this was a supplement made about wilderness exploration. So not in being in the dungeon, but out and about and all around it. So this has a great section on drawing the map, about how like Dungeon World mentions, drawing a map, leaving it blank. Suggesting that you create a map together as a table, but it doesn't have a lot of guidance in it. And this actually puts a lot of thought into how it's done. So, but again, this is like an overall like hex crawl map, and it's not at all applicable for Perilous Wild, for Pitchfork. So what I wanted to do with this is jump down to one of the steps that they have right towards the end, which is this sharing rumors and legends. And it says, starting with the player who has the most knowledgeable character, doesn't apply here. Each player, not the GM, says something they have heard about any place on the map, something no one in the party knows for sure to be true or false. This rumor or legend must be noteworthy and provocative, and whoever is taking notes should write it down. Now that's great. I really like that, right? So I'm actually just going to copy that, and I'll paraphrase it, because I think that's absolutely brilliant, right? It's saying have the conversation in character. You don't need to do that in my game. Ask clarifying questions. Chide the speaker for giving any credence, whatever, to such malarkey. Whistle and awe at the very idea. That's all meant to be in character. But the idea here is, I really like, is this one. to create a rumor or legend about any surrounding any of the named locations on the map. Now, remember, we're identifying at the beginning. We're identifying some of the. We did it here. We identified geographical details about the map. So if there's a nearby lake, every player has done that, right? And every player is coming up with a rumor as well. So every player has the opportunity. Every player has created one geographical detail and 2 settlement details, right? So there are 3 things that if you wanted to just look at the ones that you created, you could come up with one rumor or legend about one of those things pretty easily. But it could be there's something else that somebody else has created that's just jumping out at you like, okay, you created a graveyard. I have this great rumor about the graveyard, or legend about the graveyard, which is about, somebody, there's like a spirit that comes, every full moon or something. There's a rumor that there's this ghost of someone who died 100 years ago that rises from the dead and haunts the region around the graveyard. Something, I mean, that's not very creative, but something like that. And I really like that idea, right? So we're going to go with that. We're going to kind of add that in here. So it's actually the rumor, the legend is specifically about the named locations on the map. Something no one in the party knows for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's all extra info. I don't need to copy that down. The main thing I wanted to pull away from that, from Perilous Wilds, is that it's actually one of the named locations. So that's it, what I'm doing for now. We're going to look now at the very last step, which is threats, right? Threats. And this is basically, I've got 5 minutes left on stream. I'll go a little bit over, no problem. But yeah, my wife wants to watch Netflix, and I told her I might go a little bit over, so she's got until 1:15. I've got until 1:15 before she starts sucking up the bandwidth to watch Netflix, which means the stream is probably going to be pretty horrible when that happens. So anyway, I've got about 20 minutes to finish this off, and I could definitely do that. So threats. Again, I'll look at Kingdom, but so we're going to go inspiration from Kingdom here, just so I'm kind of copying it all down. Yeah, I'm not one of these Twitch streamers that can just go for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. I've not even drunk half my beer. Talking too much. Where was I? Threats. Kingdom's my inspiration. There we go. Let's get this finished. So if I jump back to making the kingdom and looking at threats, here's what Kingdom says about threats. Brainstorm three threats to the kingdom, external or internal forces or pressures that would upset the status quo. They may be brewing or looming, but they aren't actively endangering the kingdom yet. They are on the horizon. They may never materialize. It is best to have a mix of threats. If you already have 2 about external problems, consider making your third something inside the kingdom. Threats get everyone on the same page about what the kingdom is worried about when the game begins, but they're only a starting point. So, okay, that's not that helpful for what I'm looking for here. The idea here is that when I talk about threats, is what I want to create are... This is effectively potential plot hooks. So the idea here is that you create a community... The group is creating this settlement, this community together. They're creating the locations within it. They're creating the characters within it. They're creating the rumors and the legends about it, and then they're creating some threats to this community. And they're all doing it. They're all buying into this. Your players. If you're GM, your players in this game are telling you the story to tell them. I mean, there's no prep involved here, really. So you're doing this all as a group, right? And this is the secret sauce. This is the bit that makes all these other steps worth doing, right? We've got this living, breathing community, and therefore the threats feel very real, right? The threats need to be laser focused on this community, on the settlement, and Therefore, this is not going to be a list of very specific threats. They're going to be, if I would provide any suggestions, they're going to be generic, and they're going to be ones that people can grab for inspiration and tailor the fuck out of it so it applies directly to the settlement. Right? You've named this. You've named if you've got a group of five people, 4 players and a GM, kind of your standard group size, right? You're going to be having 10 locations within the city itself. You're going to have 5 locations around the city, sorry, the settlement. You're going to have how many characters do we introduce here? 1 each. Okay. 5 characters within the in addition to the ruler, 5 characters within the community. In fact, I could probably swallow the ruler section up with the characters. But yeah, you'd have 5 characters plus a ruler within that community, and then you'd have these rumors and legends, right? So within that, coming up with a threat should be child's play, and here's how we're going to do it, right? The first thing is just to inspiration from Kingdom. These must be considered from the perspective of the occupants, of the subjects in the settlement. Right, that's really important, right? These can't be threats like an invading army in the neighboring region or something like that. Or if you're using Warhammer as an example, someone pulls out some bit of lore about the end times or something. Hold on, I have my window open and there are bugs flying in because it's night. There's some bit of lore about the wider old world that they want to pull in. Oh yeah, it's, I don't know, like this is after one of the threats. I don't know, and like someone pulls some random threat out that isn't really applicable directly to the settlement. That the characters, the characters or the subjects within the settlement don't really have any knowledge of, or it'd be weird for them to have knowledge of. It needs to be very localized. Because, again, Pitchfork is a very localized game about commoners within their settlement. So, that's an important thing to make sure it's very clear. And then I want to just, like, the idea is each player... I'm just going to copy this bit because it's basically what we're doing, right? Do you want to create a threat each? I think we'll do a threat each, and then we'll vote on. Oh, there's a couple of ways of doing this. One could just be everyone apart from the GM comes up with a threat, and the GM makes note of them. But there's no guarantee that any of these are gonna happen. But then it's kind of like, why are they keeping it secret? Because the players are just going to know as soon as it starts, like, what's happening. So I think maybe the threats... Let's look again at what Kingdom says. It says to come up with 3 together. So I think we're going to do this as a group exercise. And we're going to come up with two threats. And I think 3 is a bit too much. I don't know why I'm copying this. I could just go with that. I'm trying to keep the wording consistent, that's why. Group agrees on... Group comes up with... Whoa. With 2 threats to the settlement. Group discusses and comes up with 2 threats to the settlement. These can be generic or specific and can be rolled for on a table, on a generic threat table, if desired. For example, I've actually already written this out. This is one thing I spent a little bit of time thinking about earlier. One of the abundant resource is now scarce. That's an easy one, right? We've identified an abundant resource and a scarcity. So what happens if that resource that is in abundance in your settlement suddenly is no longer abundant? It's a forest. You're known for, like, your resource is wood. What if there's a massive forest fire and all the wood burns down? That's a threat to your livelihood. It's a threat to your community, right? So that's an easy one. The second one would be like a supernatural threat. And this could be something as easy, like, again, I talked about the game at the very beginning in the introduction. One of the things I talked about when thinking about what do the players do, or what do the characters do in this game. And it's basically you're confronted with problems that cannot be ignored and will not be solved by your betters. So I'm trying to tie some of these in here. And one of them is this one here. Creature of nightmares lurks in the shadows, picking off the sick and elderly. That's a supernatural threat, right? If you're playing in the old world, it would be beastmen in the woods. It would be Skaven in the sewers. It would be that sort of thing, right? So supernatural threat. Another one would be the enemy within. To use a Warhammer term, sort of. And this would be something like if you've got cults in a city, or there are, schemers within the village plotting to do something. And again, I'm making these very, very... In fact, I'm just going to delete these examples, because the idea here is that there is some sort of scheming going on within the community that is potentially going to explode into conflict. And that's what role-playing... That's what stories are all about in role-playing, right? So that's another one that you could think about with threats. And I've come up with 6 here, so we'll keep going. Another one I've come up with is kind of relating to enemy within, is jealous neighbors. And this doesn't have to be... it could be neighboring village, a neighboring settlement. So it could be your neighbor, your literal neighbor. It could be, or like 2 neighbors who are jealous of each other, or it could be there's something happening where, one settlement is stealing supplies from your settlement. They're stealing your sheep. They're killing your sheep. Something like that. Something is happening between the two of you because there's this rivalry, right? The next one is power corrupts. And this is also about proving your innocence, or there's a lot of slashes in here. Proving guilt or innocence. And this is the one where the reason I came up with this one was back to one of the examples I gave at the beginning, which is this one. An influential noble is performing human sacrifice in the nearby woods. So you have this person in power who's corrupted in some way, right? And also tied to this one is a family member is wrongfully accused of a heinous crime. Wrongfully accused means that there's some sort of corruption going on. This could also fall under the enemy within, or a jealous neighbor, like kind of any of those. But I was trying to think specifically for what if there's something going on with the ruler, and there's something odd going about there. So if you're thinking about, like, if it's a noble family, maybe it's the youngest son of the noble family is performing human sacrifice in the woods, and you come across them. How do you prove their guilt? How do you make sure that stops happening? Because if they're sacrificing people, those people are probably members of your community. So again, these are the sorts of stories I want to kind of be telling with this game. Plague, pest, sickness is what Astanate is suggesting. It's a good one. It's not one I've come up with, but I'll add it in as a 7th one. And here's the next one: loved one at risk. So this could be missing. Someone's gone missing. Someone is sick. And we'll do the last one would be pestilence. Papa Nurgle. That would be a plague. Or a plague, for example. I think plague is a little bit harder to fit in with to tie it in specifically, it's a little bit more beyond. I mean, it definitely is something the subjects in the settlement would be worried about. It's a bit harder to think of a adventure hook maybe within that, whereas these are very, I think, a bit more specific. But I mean, we could actually put plague. Actually, hold on. The supernatural threat could be things like monster, plague, etc. It might even just change it from being supernatural to being external threat. Yeah, because that ties in nicely with the enemy within. Abundant resources now scarce. Yeah, I like that. And the plague, actually, I do like the idea of a plague, because it could be that the plague is starting and people are boarding up the houses of one or two families that have caught the plague, and there's all the stuff that goes with that. Like, they're hungry, they're desperate, they don't want to be. Yeah, plague is done by a witch, like it's like a supernatural sickness or something. Yeah, that might get its own plague. I think I'll leave it a supernatural threat because I kind of like that. Ties it into all sorts of things. Plague. Who? Natural or natural, divine. What would you say for something that's a witch has done? Devious. That'll do. And that's it. I'm 8 minutes over. I've got 7 minutes before my wife is going to use up all the internet. So that works really well. And hopefully this gives a little bit of an idea, right? You... yeah, curses plague. So we could call this we could call this plague. It could be natural, divine, curse. It all kind of ties in with the idea of a plague, right? Yeah, cool. So yeah, the whole point here, I'd love to hear in chat what you think about this, but the idea here is that you go through these steps, right? You build a community together, you build the setting together, and if you're using an existing setting, this is a really simple thing to do. You just put it in the context of the setting. The GM probably knows all about the lore of the setting. The players often don't. And this provides a framework for the GM to introduce some of the lore as you're creating the community. So someone might suggest, oh, there's, I don't know, something to do with the geography. They say, oh, I want to have this or that there. And the GM can say, well, actually, there's this is set in this region, which is like a desert. They'd be like, oh, okay, fine. So why don't, instead of doing this, we do this instead? I'm just reading the comments. Sorry. Yeah. So the idea here is that you can tie it to an existing setting, and still put your own stamp on your community, and you then create commoners, your people within that community. And I feel like this is an interesting way to go through these steps. A lot of this is inspired by the game Kingdom, which is a community building game, and I think at first blush this is how I want to approach things. And again, this is going to be the deluxe version that I'm looking at, where there'll be lots of tables for all these steps eventually being created. So I think initially I might try and come up with something that fits on 2 pages, like a single spread, and this is the short version of how to create your community. It's going to take 15 to 20 minutes of your time at the start. Then you create your characters within that scope. And the characters are going to be about the same. So that would be, we're talking about probably an hour all told before you actually start playing, which might make it less of a one-shot for a lot of groups. My home group, for example, when we play, we're playing for 2 to 3 hours typically. Because we're all older, we've got kids, and we just don't have as much time. So if you're playing in a one-shot that's 4 or 5 hours long, then absolutely this could work. I guess this should probably be one of the design goals, and maybe I'll just put this at the top here. Design goals. because I've actually got quite a few in a different document. I'll add these in later and talk about them in my next episode. But I'll just add this here before I forget it, which is that community and character creation need to be quick by default, with longer mini supported to drag it out. Drag's a terrible way of phrasing it. To extend it. Extend the process to a full session. And we're going to say here quick by default. We're going to say hopefully up to 30 minutes. Oof. So to do that, I think that I'm going to have to meet that design goal, I'm going to have to go through here. I'm going to have to take this initial thing. I'm going to have to scrub it right back. Only focus on a smaller number of things. So you're working your way through these steps. Maybe there's going to be a lot of group. Only have everyone come up with one thing a couple of times. So that there's still, like, I think creating characters individually is a really important part. Coming up with the locations is a really important part. And I think coming up with rumors and legends. Yeah. I think those three things could be things that everyone comes up with together. But I don't know. 30 minutes seems like, if you're including character creation into the whole thing, I think this whole thing here, the way I've got it, is just going to take too long. And I think rumors and legends, for example, it ties a little bit closely with threats. So that whole step could theoretically be stripped out, and just have it going from creating your characters to creating the threats. The rumors and legends, I think, adds a lot of flavor to it and is the ideal way to do it. But again, if you're trying to do it quickly and you want to do a quick version of it, then yeah. Or I create a bunch of tables and I say, here's like what I've done here. Here's some generic rumors and legends. Pick one and tailor it to a location or a character. And you can have things like a haunting. That could be an option. Or what's another rumor or legend? Some mythical creature, like a unicorn or a nixie or something like this in the nearby lake, something like this, like where you just provide, like, here are some ideas for a rumor or a legend. Pick one of them and tailor it to your setting. So it's just like you're not doing one each. You're just like looking at it as a group, and you're doing it very quickly. So. Yeah, so let me just, before I finish off here, I've got 1 minute left. I'm just going to quickly read the chat, see if I'm missing out on anything. So, positive projects, not just threats. Yeah. The positive projects, I think you're coming up with when you're talking about the characters, right? You're talking about their concept, what do they do within the community, what are their wishes or fears, what are their... a wish would be a positive element of that. When you're talking about the resources, you're kind of talking about like what the group is about. I have to admit, a lot of these things like resources and characters, like the game Kingdom and the game The Quiet Year, have projects. They have like projects that you're building within the community to improve things, and I think that's something that might need to come up in play. And I'm not, but we could probably come up with, that could be an additional step, right? I'll just quickly add that here. What is the settlement working on to make their lives better? Yep, I like that, because that provides another bit of tension where there could be something threatening that. When you look at the threats there, absolutely something that could be put at threat. Yeah, Project of the Ark. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I agree. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's exactly the same as in The Quiet Year, where you're setting up projects to do specific things. It could also be like investigating some nearby. Maybe something's identified on the map that there's a cave. There's some caves in the hills nearby, and the project could be exploring the caves, for example, to see what's inside. And yeah, you could tie threats to that. You could tie a new abundance for the community, that sort of thing. Okay. Attila asks, how far do I think I am from a Kickstarter? Yes. Boy, that's a good question. I wish I had the answer to that. I'm not that close to playtesting because I need to put a little bit more thought into the... Well, I've made decisions on the core, the skills I'm going to be using. I've made a decision on the character creation side of things, like what kind of careers you're going to have, how the age affects how many points you're going to have. And one of the things I've come up with is the conflict, the trauma system, which I talked about last time. So really, apart from that, I'm using a lot of similar stuff to Vaesen, which is the latest the latest Free League game. One of the more elegant ones that's come out. It's also on the lighter side of the crunch scale, if you will, and that also really definitely broadly appeals to me. So I'm going to be tapping into a lot of those mechanics, at least for the first play test, and I can kind of scrub and tweak things as I go. So I can't do anything with Kickstarter until I've done a play test. Once the first kind of play testing phase is finished, I will wrap this, and I'll do the play testing live on this as well, try and get some people involved to come in and help play test. Once that's done, I will try and put this together as a document, like a playtest document, so that people can get out there and play it themselves. And that means a bit of scrubbing, wordsmithing, fleshing things out that need to be fleshed out, putting in that sort of thing, like putting a little bit of art in. If I've got some art, I do have some art I can put in, and that sort of thing. So making it look a bit nice and a bit readable. And then once that's done, theoretically, I can kickstart, right? So the idea is I would never go to kickstart a project before I had a playable, workable draft of something in production first. So I don't know. I think I could probably get the first playtest done, or I could probably air the first playtest in the next 2 or 3 design diary sessions. Maybe even earlier. I don't think it's ready for the next. I'm ready for the next one. So yeah, theoretically by the end of July, I could be playtesting this here on the stream. Once it's playtested, it'll probably take me another 2 to 3 design diary sessions, but also time in between, like working on it, to get a document together that is kind of in a readable state. Theoretically, I could just pitch this document out and have this is probably the smarter thing to do if I want to do a Kickstarter a little bit earlier, would be to just make this look a bit nicer, this Google document, share that with people so they can use it themselves, they can make a copy of it, they can tweak it and edit it themselves, and then have in my desktop publishing program, I can play around with here on the stream. I can play around with a spread of what I want what I want the actual finished product to look like as a first draft. Of course, that would probably change with time, but at least to show I have the knowledge of making something that looks really nice, and putting something together so I can show it as an image during the Kickstarter. Say, here's some sample of the art that we're going to be using and the artist I'm going to be using. Here's a sample of what the layout's going to look like when it's finished. Here's the format it's going to be in. And if you want to see how it plays and what the rules are like, here's the current playtest beta, which you can go and click on and play right now, or read and see what you think. So there's still some things to think about that I need to think about and develop before I'm at that stage, but it's not that far off, I don't think. So thinking projects for the arc, building an aqueduct doesn't fit with building community, more on the gaming part, like Mutant Zero. Yeah, again, I don't know how far I want to go with Pitchfork being a community simulator, more as the whole point of this thing I've just done is to provide a 3-dimensional community that the player characters are going to be a part of. And I think the rest of it, the whole development of the community, is just something that can organically happen during play, and it can be as big or as small of a focus as the table wants it to be. So I don't think I'll actually develop that at all. And if people wanted to develop it, they could absolutely use Forbidden Lands as a source of inspiration with the stronghold mechanics to think about adding in, porting on some sort of modular base building mechanic. But I don't really want to touch that. Building a bridge to reach a neighboring village. Yeah, for Kickstarter, you don't really need to have anything defined yet. I have very strong feelings about what's needed for a Kickstarter, and for me to be able to make it, like from a business perspective, for me to be able to maximize the feeling of reliability that I've got. So I'm maximizing the amount of backers I'll be able to get on board, so I can produce the best product I can. Because the more money I get, the more money I can spend on art, basically. I can get in more people to do editing to make it like just seeing a lot more editing is something I would, on a shoestring budget, I would do myself, or I would try and crowdsource a bit of it. But really, I would want to hire a professional editor for that. I could look at hiring people to do like translations of it into other languages. There's a whole bunch of stuff I could do, and I wouldn't be doing that as the base. So I'd be asking for a very small amount to say, the very minimum I need to get this game out is this. However, stretch goals would be things like producing an offset print run if I earn a certain amount, like if I'm able to bring in a certain amount from crowdfunding. Again, I'll be doing a whole video about crowdfunding later, much later, if I once it's ready to get to that stage. Because I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've been following a lot of people, read a lot of advice things on this. I'm a super, it's called like a super backer on Kickstarter. I've backed well over 200 projects. I'm obsessed with how crowdfunding works. I've been doing Patreon for over a year on my Mud and Blood channel. So I very much know how all the ins and outs work. And for me, it's all about maximizing it so that I don't do a Kickstarter and have it fail. I want to make it as successful as possible so I can produce the best thing I can. Yeah, and that's basically what it's down to. So DLC is a big thing. Expansions, etc. Next episode, then, yeah, things like limited editions, that would absolutely be something I'd be keen to do, but yeah, that costs a lot of money, and that wouldn't be something I'd be looking at initially. So next episode, let me just quickly bring up my my calendar here. I'll do it offline because I got a lot of personal stuff on my calendar which I don't necessarily want to share with the world. So next week we're doing session 1, which is kind of like a session 0 plus prologue of our new Vaesen campaign, or Vaesen campaign. I'm not going to be GMing it. I'm going to be a player in it, which makes me very happy. Eric, who is one of the players in our Forbidden Lands game, is going to be GMing that. And we've got some familiar faces and some new faces coming in for Vaesen. Mostly new players, actually, new faces. So let me look at what we've got up next. So Vaesen is next week. The week after that is Forbidden Lands, where we're going to do session 3 of Forbidden Lands. And then it'll be Design Diary after that. So it's going to be 3 weeks away before I return to this. It is possible that I might do a little bit more on a Thursday evening, but I probably won't because I kind of want to keep that as my chill out day. And this is pretty intense, the Design Diary. I do a little bit of prep for it in terms of like thinking about the topic I want to be discussing. And yeah, it takes quite a lot of mental energy beforehand to make one of these happen. So and at Thursdays is midweek. I've got a lot of the quarantine is slowly starting to lift here in Germany, and things are getting a little bit busier at home. So I want to kind of keep my Thursdays to being a little bit more low key. And for me, that's continuing with it as like a chill out day where I'm playing Arma 3 with Astaneta is actually our GM in that. So playing a video game with a GM where we're playing a military simulator, 3 players, 1 person controlling Zeus, which is the mod which allows 1 player to create the landscape, to drop things in, to control characters, etc. And that's really fun. Modded to look like Twilight 2000, which is a game we're going to be hopefully starting in July. Yeah, so I want to keep that separate. So yeah, 3 weeks. It'll be the 5th of July. 5th of July is the date that we'll be doing the next Design Diary. So until then, thanks for watching, and yeah, catch you next time.